Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 70, A Darker Star Wars. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in the TV series Andor. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing quite fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well, too. Thank you. And what's new in your writing world?
New in my writing world, I'm still doing editing for my sci-fi book, The Deep Dark, getting that towards beta very slowly. Just done a little bit of editing. Mostly I've been focused on setting up business stuff, ads, promotions, just kind of miscellaneous things that have been outstanding, organizing notes, that kind of stuff. Lots of little things behind the scenes, more so than actually writing, unfortunately, but getting there, slowly getting there. How about you? What's going on in your writing world?
Well, I hate to sound like a broken record, which for our younger listeners, that's a piece of vinyl that a needle gets placed on, and if there's a scratch, the needle will stay in that spot over and over again.
Yeah.
I am still working on Ecliptic, the second book in my space opera, The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard. I am in the last chapter. It's kind of funny, and I'll be interested in hearing what you think about this. The writing is going really well. I'm very happy with where it's going. But like, for example, I stopped in the middle of a scene because I wanted to think about what the characters would be eating. Now, I know that seems like a ridiculous sort of attention to detail piece that's probably not needed, but I feel like it's kind of important in this circumstance because I have a set of characters who have been recurring sub-characters who are now joining my main characters for this meal for the first time. They've been rivals. They have not really liked each other very much. And now because of some circumstances, they're kind of coming together a little bit. And I thought, okay, in this particular case, I want their choice of food to kind of reflect their personalities. And it's not going to be a big issue. And it's something that a reader's not even probably going to notice consciously, but subconsciously, that food choice is going to communicate something about these new people sort of entering the circle. And I know on one hand it seems kind of ridiculous, but on the other hand, it's kind of important to me. I want to get it just quite right to match their personalities. Does that sound nuts?
No, that doesn't sound nuts at all. That's the kind of thing where when I'm going through my first draft, I leave a little comment to myself that says, choose their food that matches their personalities, and then I just move on because I would otherwise be like, okay, I gotta look this up. Let me think about these different things, and it would take too long. So I just, for that kind of stuff, I just leave a comment and progress. But you're right at the end, so yeah, it makes sense to just want to finish that off.
Yeah, and I think I've almost got it. I think I've got like the leader of this group is a big guy with a big, massive charcoal black beard, and I think I'm going to give him like meat because he seems like a meat guy, right? And then he's got his other two team members are, one of them is this very, very thin woman. She's very sarcastic, very sort of kind of unpleasant. And I'm thinking about giving her meat too, like she eats the same thing he does, because it would be a contrast with her being so skinny. She's small. She's just this sort of, she makes me think of a piece of paper that gives you a paper cut.
She's like Angela in The Office, if you ever saw the American version of The Office.
I know, I never saw that. just sort of like thin and sort of annoying, and occasionally she'll get a slice in that's painful, but it's not gonna like, it's not the end of the world, but it's sort of like, ow, that really hurt. And then the other guy is just sort of this smart, but also unpleasant, sort of just smarmy kind of guy. And I was thinking about just having him eat nothing but vegetables. Like he's really healthy eater, even though he's not a healthy communicator.
Yeah.
I thought but I don't know. So I'm still kind of just thinking about it. And I know that seems ridiculous, right? Why spend so much time on that little detail? But it does help communicate something about the character. I don't know. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Yeah. Just think about how you want them to be portrayed. I like the contrast, like when it's not expected.
Yeah.
Like you have one character where it's like, okay, yeah, I kind of expect that. And the other one's like, oh, okay, I wasn't expecting that. What is that saying about her? Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, thank you. So that's where I am. I think I've come down on it. I'm hoping I will get to that today. And these are actually, like I've talked about before, last chapter, I've already got the main scenes of the chapter, the main sort of things that need to be communicated in the chapter. So these are just connecting scenes that I am building in. And and even though they're just connecting scenes, to me, they still need to be as thoughtful as possible. It's not just, word padding. It's
right.
What will these people do between these scenes that makes sense? So anyway, yeah. That's
I almost think the ends is very important.
Yeah.
Right. It's like that's it shows what your story was and where your characters have ended up. I think that's a significant thing.
Exactly. So yeah.
How long do your chapters end up being typically?
My goal is to do at least 2,000 words. 2,500 is where I really like to be, and I usually end up at 3,000, 35, or 4,000, depending on what's going on in the chapter. So it's sort of like, if I write 2,000 words, then I'm saying I'm happy with that. I'm like, okay, that is a complete chapter as far as I'm concerned, as far as like what I think is satisfying as a reader experience to have 2,000 words. 2,500 is better. And then, but what usually happens is usually 3 or 3,500 or 4,000 words. Yeah. And it really depends on what's happening in the chapter.
Yeah, totally depends.
Yeah, because sometimes there's a lot going on, and I don't try to restrict myself. If the chapter's a long chapter, it's a long chapter. So I try not to do any padding. Try to make sure everything that's happening is important and it's moving on. It's like taking from a lot of the great stories that we have talked about here on the podcast. Everything should be connected to something moving forward. I really try to do that and try not to have just blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, I'm close. I'm very close. And then after that is the epilogue, and I simply have to go into my World Bible, and I have one character who's going to be talking to another character. It's going to be the introduction of this new character, and I believe I have a name for her, but I have to go check my World Bible to make sure I have a name for her, because if I don't, I have to create a name for her.
Right.
Well, as a reminder to our listeners, you can read The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard as it's being written on Patreon, and you can also read The Tales of Zara, which is Mike's young adult fantasy series. And the first book in that series is available on Amazon, both in episodic format on Kindle Vella, as well as on Amazon as an ebook and paperback and in Kindle Unlimited. And Mike also has available the first draft of his adult science fiction story, The Deep Dark. That's available in episodic format on Kindle Vella as well. And all of those links will be in the show notes. So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books, movies, or television?
I was watching a TV show. It's not science fiction or fantasy, but it's a show. I think it's on Amazon Prime, called The Outlaws, which is a pretty cool show. It's this drama show in the UK, at least it's set in the UK, about a group of people who are from different walks of life, who've all committed some crime, relatively minor crime, and they're sent to do community service. So they're there as a group, and there's conflict between them because you have some people who are from different stations, from totally different personality types, and one of them, I think, is like the first. There's 3 seasons now. I think sets up in the first season where one of them hides some stolen money near where they're working, and that ends up pulling them all into trouble that they have to face together. So they kind of all have to work together. It's a cool show. It's like I said, it's not science fiction or fantasy, but I enjoy it. I think the first season or two has Christopher Walken as one of the characters, which was surprising. He plays a very different role than what I've seen him in and other things. So that was cool. But yeah, it's an enjoyable show. Very good writing, some good drama, some funny stuff sprinkled throughout as well. And I think that's the main thing I've been watching, and I'm just reading, my own stuff as I edit, and the book that we'll talk about next week.
Yeah.
What stories have you come across in the last week?
You know what? Not very much. Been watching Andor, obviously, in preparation for this podcast, and also the book that we're going to talk about next week, which we'll reveal at the end of the podcast. But also, the only other thing that I've really been consuming is, I don't know if you know this, but this is Jurassic June. Did you know that?
No, what does that mean?
Well, most of the Jurassic Park movies were released in June.
Okay,
so
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the fans of the Jurassic Park movies celebrate the entire month long as Jurassic June. And our offspring is a big dinosaur fan. So we do something for Jurassic June at the behest of our offspring on a pretty regular basis. So there have been Jurassic Park movie marathons, and one year we recreated one of the meals described, I believe, in the book. So this year we did something a little bit lower key, just sort of decorated the house as best as we could with existing plants to make it more jungly, and then watched the original Jurassic Park movie again.
Excellent. Yeah, you can't go wrong with that.
Yeah, so that's what we've been consuming recently as far as our entertainment.
Very cool.
Are you ready to talk about Andor?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, let's go. Today we're talking about the story told in the television series Andor. And I'm going to read the description of the series from IMDb. Prequel series to Star Wars' Rogue One. In an era filled with danger, deception, and intrigue, Cassian Andor will embark on the path that is destined to turn him into a rebel hero. Did you like this TV show?
Yeah, so it's the prequel to the prequel.
Yeah.
Let's keep going back in time, and then we're going to learn what happened before Andor. Yeah, I like the show. I think they did a very good job with it. I think the writing is fairly sharp and consistent. Plot's fairly coherent throughout. I like the way that they set things up and then knock them down like dominoes. It seems like a plausible story within the Star Wars universe. It's very much in the style of Rogue One, right? Where it's less about the Jedi and the Sith and more about what it would be like for the other people living under the oppression of the Empire. And I don't know, I thought it was cool to see sort of this formation of the rebellion, the different parties, how they worked and how they came together. Obviously, we know Andor from Rogue One, so seeing more of his backstory is interesting. We definitely get a hint in the movie. Not a hint. He outright says, he's done horrible things, and he wants that to be meaningful. So it's good to start seeing some of that in the show. I like the way they set things up in this story. It starts off with a bang, right? He's immediately in trouble from pretty much the opening scene from the get-go. And it leads to this cascading series of events which get worse and worse and worse. Not only for him, but the people around him. And it takes him, to where we see at the end of the story, which leads into Rogue One. This whole series is sort of like, it almost felt like Act 1 of his journey, maybe Act 1 and 2, where it's like he's pushed out of his ordinary life, right? And then he finally gets to the point at the end where, okay, he's on board. That's something where in a story that usually occurs like halfway through the story, typically. I don't know how many seasons they're planning of this. I know they're working on the second one, or maybe they've already filmed it. So there's at least 2 seasons, which will be interesting to see. But yeah, I like the setup. I like this overall. I thought it was funny how pretty much none of this story would have happened if not for an overzealous underling that refused to let the incident go that his boss told him to. If he had just ignored it, then Cassian would have been fine and all his stuff would not have happened. I thought that was funny. Yeah, and it's interesting. This is kind of a 2 stories in one. There's a heist story and there's a prison escape story, right? You get the heist first part of the story where they're going to steal I don't know what it was, the gold or whatever from, that planet. And then when he gets captured, there's the whole sequence where he has to escape. So it's like multiple, not necessarily genres, but multiple types of story elements in one season. So I thought that was cool. And I thought both of those sequences were good types of that storytelling, right? Well, the prison escape scene was great, and the heist scene was great. I thought they did a really good job with that. Yeah, overall, I liked it. I do have some issues, some things that I would improve, but yes, overall, I liked it. And yeah, what are your thoughts on it? What did you like about Andor?
I really enjoyed this when it first came out, and I enjoyed it even more watching it again through the lens of talking about the story. It is really a well done series, and I know that there are some people who were frustrated with it because it's such a deviation of what you see in Star Wars most of the time. Most of the time, Star Wars is very much about black and white, good guys and bad guys, the moral and ethical decision making is very clearly laid out. You don't have to worry about whether your characters are going to do the right thing or the wrong thing because it's just the way the characters are built. You can watch them do that, and so the story is going to be focused on something else. This, however, is focused on morality and ethics, and it's and the gray areas between which. And I thought that was really a brilliant decision on the part of the storytellers because we have the glorious black and white stories already in place. How the rebellion wins, of how Luke Skywalker destroys the Death Star, about how Luke Skywalker takes his ethics and destroys the Emperor. We have those stories already. But how do you get a rebellion started? You can't do that in a black and white way. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be gray. It's going to have ethical decisions that are going to be difficult and messy. And I think that's okay for this. And I think those who are not crazy about this, I think that's fine. There's so much great Star Wars out there to watch. If you don't want to learn how the rebellion started, just jump right in to the rebellion kicking Death Star butt. I mean, I think that's okay. But I think if you want to know how the rebellion started and you want to see a very realistic portrayal of how the rebellion started, this is where you begin. And I think it's just brilliantly done. I love how Andor is an uncertain protagonist. You just don't know what he's going to do. And you're right. They started off with a bang right away. It was shocking to see the beginning of this series where within just the first few minutes, he commits murder. It was, it's not what you expect to see from Star Wars. And so that's, a surprise and shocking. And it tells you exactly where you're going to go here. Fortunately, that doesn't happen that often in the rest of the series. So it's sort of like, when you start a new series and they have like nudity in the first episode just to get everybody into the story. And then after that, they don't see it anymore. I'm looking at you, Stargate. You don't see that kind of just really cold-blooded violence, not to that degree in the rest of the series. So, but it definitely gives you this protagonist who you just don't know what he's going to do from moment to moment, what is going to decide him, what is motivating him. Self-preservation. That's it. And finding his sister. He's got some sub-level motivations with his mom and some friends, but he's still willing to put his friends in danger to do what he wants to do. So he's this very uncertain protagonist. You just don't know what he's going to do. The other thing I really liked about this, and you kind of referenced this when you mentioned Cyril Karn, who is this low-level functionary who, wanted to bring Andor to justice after he committed this murder, is the wonderful contrasts of what justice means to all the different people in this series. Cyril Karn's version of justice is very different from Andor's version of justice, from Marva's version of justice, from Luthen's version of justice, from Mon Mothma's version of justice. It's fascinating to see how these people are perceiving justice and the steps they're taking to accomplish it through their own lens. I think that's just amazing.
Yeah, those are all fantastic points. I think you're right. This story definitely adds a more nuanced depth to the Star Wars universe. Less hero's journey, action adventure-y kind of, get amped up and and root for the winners kind of story. And more, like you said, it's more about what would these people have to go through to launch a rebellion against such a powerful empire, such a powerful opponent. It's not going to be easy. You're going to have to work with the underground. You're going to have to work with shady people. You're going to have to do things that are distasteful and that maybe you don't like. You're going to have to make other people do those things too, as we see. And I think they did a good job of showing various aspects of that. And then even in the prison sequence, on the prison break sequence, it's like we see people there who kind of like Cassian, they're just like, well, let's just get through this, right? And then we'll go back and just do our own thing. And even there, they have to be pushed to realize, no, it's not, this isn't going to work, right? That's like a little micro story that's reflective of the larger story that they're telling.
Yes.
And they're forced to rebel within their system.
Yeah.
So I like the way they did that too. I like the parallels that they had in that story. Yeah, you're going to have to make harsh, tough decisions. And I also liked that we get to see the quandaries of Mon Mothma. Here's this character who we barely see at all, right? In Star Wars. But clearly she played, a significant role in Star Wars. She was like the face of the leader of the rebellion at that point. We don't really know what else was going on behind the scenes because we just hear her talk for a little bit. But now we get to see her background and the stuff that she had to go through and the danger that she was in this whole time. And it makes sense. Like someone in that position, they'd be constantly putting themselves at risk. You just get a sense of the tension and the fear that you'd have to constantly be dealing with to be in that place and try to hold everything together. And then with their family stuff going on too.
And the family.
Yeah, I like all these elements.
Yeah, are so interwoven into what's happening. It's absolutely fascinating. A couple other things that I noticed. I did not see this the first time I watched the series, but the second time I watched it, did you see how when Luthen, who is played by Stellan Skarsgård, I think it's the second episode, he appears on Ferrix to meet with Andor, and he gets off the shuttle and he's walking away and he looks like a Jedi Knight. The way his cloak is moving, he's got a walking stick in one hand, but it kind of looks like it's reminiscent of a lightsaber. And I kind of realized at that moment, I think Luthen is kind of a keeper of the flame for the Jedi. And what's really fascinating is that when you see, there's another episode further in the series, I forget which one it is, I should look it up, where he's talking to their mole within the ISB, the Imperial Security Bureau or whatever.
Yeah.
There he looks like Darth Vader with a black cloak, exuding sort of a negative power. And it's sort of like he's had to tap into both the dark side and the light side in order to do the job. If that makes any sense.
No, that does. That's really cool. I didn't pick up on that.
And and it's just this little visual cues here that could, I'm sure, purposeful, but I didn't notice them the first time around, and I noticed them this way. The episode is One Way Out. And the titles of these episodes were also really brilliant. I really appreciated One Way Out. In this episode, that's the one you were talking about the prison break, right?
Yeah.
And they're saying the prisoners are chanting one way out, one way out. But in the same episode, you're seeing Mon Mothma trying to find her way through a very difficult situation so she won't be caught. And she's shown there's only one way out. And it's not a pleasant way out. And then in the same episode, we're seeing Luthen meeting with his ISB mole, trying to figure out how to escape with their lives this very dangerous situation. And there's only one way out for them too. It's just fascinating, like and like you said, the prison break was this sort of mini microcosm of the entirety of the rebellion within the Empire. And, that episode title reflecting that in both the prison break microcosm as well as the larger macrocosm of the rebellion and the people involved. It's just really well done.
That's great. Yeah, I picked up on some of those things through. I didn't pick on that one in particular, but I did notice how there were sort of parallel themes with the different threads that were going on, and they wove them together so well. And played them off of each other so well. And that was a perfect example. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. I also liked his speech that he gives. Like, the guy asks, well, what have you sacrificed? He's like, I had to sacrifice my soul, basically, to make this work. None of this happens unless someone is willing to do what needs to be done, push down all their instincts, and make the tough choices. And it's so true and so believable.
And the other thing I really enjoyed, like you talked about, was how everything that happened to Andor was like dominoes falling. It was links in a chain of events, right? He goes to see if he can find his sister, an incredibly noble and innocent purpose. He's harassed by tin pot security guys who then trigger this chain of events. In defending himself, he accidentally kills one and then murders the other one so he won't get caught, then causes Cyril Karn to investigate, thereby causing catastrophe on Ferrix, thereby causing the ISB to... I mean, it's just, boom, 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 all of these dominoes falling from this, like you said, one little incident that essentially creates the rebellion in a way. I mean, obviously doesn't, because Luthen's been doing the work, but it just sort of causes it all to blow up. And it's absolutely fascinating and very well done. It all makes sense as you watch the dominoes fall. And it's almost, there's a feeling of inevitability about it, which is brought about not only by the logic of the dominoes falling, but also what's driving each one of these characters. And again, I take that back to this vision of whatever justice is to these characters. Their idea of justice is causing the inevitable fall of those dominoes.
Yeah. I don't think the story works quite as well if we don't see that glimpse of Andor as a child. Seeing like, okay, here's this innocent kid who is on this planet just trying to, live his life. And then he just gets in this situation where there's no choice but to pull him out of this. It's like, it's a story so much of people not having a choice, right? It's like, well, what are you going to do? If we leave this kid here, he's going to die. So Marva takes him with them and puts him into a whole new life. But that allows us to see the humanity in him, right? He's not just this rogue, not just this thief. He's this kid who was put into an awful position since he was young. Yeah. And like you said, it's like he starts off with him just wanting to find his sister.
And I think also, like you when you started said, it wouldn't help if you did. It wouldn't have worked as well if you didn't see Andor's backstory. I also think this wouldn't have worked as well if we didn't see the inner workings of the Empire as well. In the past, in Star Wars, the Empire is just sort of more of a nebulous, negative blob, right? You can see some of their behavior, but they're still the Empire's pretty undefined, right? We don't really dig deep into any of the characters' personalities in the Empire, except for Darth Vader, a little bit of Palpatine. We get a few of the admirals, right? But just in the circumstances of their work as an admiral. But here, we're digging deep into Dedra Miro and her motivations and the behavior of the Imperial Security Bureau, or whatever they're called, the ISB. And I don't think this story would work so well if we didn't get that deep dive into them as well.
And I love that there's politicking going on within the Empire, and there's this bureaucracy that's at work. Because obviously there would be, but you don't really get a sense of that from, an action adventure story. They're not really going to dig into the bureaucratic behemoth that is the Empire.
Exactly. So there's a lot here to love, but is there anything that you might have changed as a writer?
Yeah, there's a few things. I think, well, I was a little disappointed that the sister thread was just kind of dropped. It felt like it was sort of a writing technique to get him out and about and into trouble, and then it just kind of went away. That as a goal for him disappeared. I mean, for obvious reasons. He was just trying to survive. But I hope that comes back up at some point. I would like to have seen him get some more, like another piece of information or something, that maybe she's out there. Something to give us like a little bit of hope for him as a character. And then, this is something that we've mentioned before. I think with Foundation, I would have added a touch of humor. Obviously, this is
pretty serious.
It's a much more serious, very different type of story. It's almost anti-Star Wars in tone. It's very grim, very humorless, tension and strife and grief. It's like all of the dark emotions are pushed onto us in this show. And it certainly makes sense tonally with what's happening, right, and what they're going through, and connects with Rogue One. But even in Rogue One, there were some great moments of humor in that movie. And I would have liked to have seen a little bit of that here, because it's very overpowering in this story. And given the fact that it's a whole season of a TV show, it could be a bit oppressive at times. Like you said, it's a different part of Star Wars. We get to see a different aspect of Star Wars. So I'm not talking like, Marvel movies, let's throw in jokes here and there, that kind of thing. I don't think that would have worked, but just a little bit. There's some close elements to that with the droid. I think they did a great job with the droid. We didn't even talk about that with B. I think maybe that could have been an opportunity to have, just a little bit of comic relief or something. So that's one thing. That's something I always want in things that are just really serious. And then the biggest thing for me, I would have shrunk the season. I feel like they spent an unnecessary amount of time in most of the sections. If you break it off into the different areas where he was and what was going through at that time, it felt like they were padding the story a bit here. It's like, oh, we have 12 episodes. Okay, now what are we going to do in this episode? I felt like they could have chopped a good 2 or 3 episodes out and tightened up the story a little bit. It felt like we were starting to meander, like when they're prepping the attack on the garrison. That seemed a little long, and then the prison section seemed a little long. It's like, we get it. We understand what's happening here. I don't need 3 episodes of them just building stuff and suffering through stuff and slowly learning information. The way that they revealed everything and the way they developed everything was nice. I just think it was a little bit too long. So I would have shrunk those things in particular, and probably the whole season down to 9 or 10 episodes. Those are the big things that I had. I mean, there's little stuff like when they finally do escape Andor with the other guy, I forget his name, and they get out. I'm like, how are they going to get out of this situation? Like, now they're on this planet, which is presumably controlled by the Empire, in the middle of this lake or bay or whatever it was, and they swim out, and there just happens to be these guys there who flew to this planet to fish. Like, that seemed awfully coincidental. I probably would have made a better reason for that, but it was fine. So, like, little stuff, there's a few little things like that, but they're fine. I'm willing to overlook that stuff. Anyway, is there anything that you would improve?
I actually had very similar comments. it was about pacing. Now, I actually didn't mind the number of episodes. I understand when she said that, I was like, yeah, I could see that. I could see tightening it up, maybe tightening up some of the storytelling so that you don't have so many episodes, keeping the same information, just shortening it up a bit. The big thing I had was, and I like you said, I think Cassian's backstory was really good, but I did not like the way it was done. I found it completely sort of destroyed the pace to have us go into his backstory. None of it's in English. It's hard to follow. You're asking yourself, what's going on here? Why are these kids alone? You don't find that out until I think the second episode, why these kids are, out in the jungle by themselves. And I felt that's really slowed things down. I think I would have I don't think I would have had the kids talking in a different language. I think we just they should have just kept it in English so we could figure out what was going on. I think it just slowed things down to have sort of these flashbacks that were not in English, and you're kind of just confused and what's going on here, and that sort of destroyed the pace. And it's unfortunate because the rest of the episodes are so good, some of them are just downright riveting, that I think people may have dropped off before they got into and invested into the series because the pace was so kind of uncertain in the first 2 episodes because of those flashbacks. And the other thing I had was the same thing. Why on earth would these fishermen first capture them and then let them go and give them their ship? That whole scene did not make sense to me.
Yeah.
That scene did not make sense to me. I think it would have been better if they had just successfully stole the ship. They ran to the ship, the guys tried to catch them, they stole the ship, they flew away. The whole scene with being captured and then talking their way out of it, and the guys looking like they're going to kill them, and then, for the reward, and then letting them go. It was sloppy storytelling in a series that was otherwise actually pretty mostly very tight. So that was just sort of my feeling.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I like that we got glimpses of Cassian's childhood, but like a lot of things in the show, I feel like there was too much time spent on it. We didn't need that much. We got it. Once we get it, we'll move on. I think it was kind of that I felt like that's why I feel like they were trying to fill space with some stuff. Like, let's put some more of this, or maybe that's just the writing style. It's like a slower. We're going back to this thread. We're going to give you a little bit more information. We're going back to this thread. We're going to give you a little bit more information. We're going back to this thread. We're going to give you a little bit more information. I just felt like throughout the series, there was just a little bit too much of that. Cut one of those 2 scenes out and merge it, right? How many scenes do we need to see of them in the prison, walking along, walking through the tube, talking to another group? You could just have one where he talks to the other group, and then the second where they get information. Cut out. I think there were 3 of those. Cut out the middle one. Just like stuff like that, where it could have just been tightened up. And I think his flashbacks was another example of that. So yeah, I agree. It's a shame because overall, I think it's a very good story. I really like what they did with it. I really like the setup. I think it's perhaps the best written of the Star Wars shows, the best written and produced of the live action TV shows that they've done. But we haven't talked about any of the other ones, so I don't want to give any spoilers away for those.
So did you pull any themes from Andor?
I think there's a lot going on here. If I had to look at it overall from Cassian Andor's perspective, the theme that I came up with is you can only hide from oppression for so long before you realize you have to fight back. And I think, as I mentioned before, I think that's hammered into him in multiple acts of this story. If you look at it over the course of this season, they're constantly pushing against him, right? It's like, join this fight, right? And he just wants to go off and avoid it and do his own thing. And then, even with the prison escape, he gets out, and that still didn't really push him into the rebellion yet. It wasn't until he went back home and finally realized, okay, this is never going to stop. Everyone around me is going to be suffering. We have to do something. So anyway, that's the big overall message I got. What about you? What do you have a main theme? Other themes? What do you got?
I got 2. One of them was actually a theme of redemption. because I think Cassian is struggling to find redemption for himself, redemption for abandoning his sister, because I think that's one of the things that he's the sort of dragging him down, anchoring him a bit as a character. And that, that's the first thing we see is him looking for his sister. And so I think there's some redemption there. There's redemption for the, his murdering of those security guards. I don't think he wanted to do that. And he's constantly making poor choices. You kind of get hints of this, why he owes people money. He and Bix are no longer together, and you get a feeling that, was somehow his behavior that's doing it, and she's constantly trying to help him clean up his messes. And he's struggling to figure out how to redeem himself and struggling to run from this concept of redemption, which is constantly getting him into different terrible situations, right? So, and I think that need for redemption also is what, drives him to join the Aldani heist, because he wants the money so he can pay people back so that he can take Marva away so he can live his life. That's what he sees as redemption. And so I think it's just really interesting. But you also see this in Cyril Karn, who leads the attack on Ferrex to try to capture Andor and then causes chaos. He's trying to find redemption. I think to some degree, Dedra Miro is looking for some kind of redemption. I'm not sure about her, but I think we could kind of maybe dissect her a bit and see if that pans out for her a bit. She's definitely she's ambitious, but we're not sure what's driving her ambition other than, and I think what's driving her ambition is this, the second theme I pulled, which is justice, right? So Cyril Karn says he's looking for justice. I think she's looking for justice on behalf of the Empire. I think Andor is looking for justice for the things that have happened to him that have forced him to do these behaviors that he needs to get redeemed for. And I think there's these overlapping and sort of interwoven arcs of both seeking redemption, looking for redemption. Do we need redemption and justice? What does justice look like? How does that interconnect with redemption? So that's kind of what I took out of it.
Yeah, that's great. I like those. I think there's also a theme of having to make terrible decisions in order to break free from the yoke of oppression, right? Because so many of these characters had to make these awful decisions, certainly on the rebellion side. And I think they all have to suffer from the pain of that and just kind of suck it up. It's like, well, they all realize, well, I guess this is what I have to do. Even you see it from the very beginning, right? When Andor accidentally kills, one of the cops, and he realizes there's no way I can let this other guy live. That'll be the end, and he has to make that horrible decision right then, at least in his mind. And we see that iterated throughout the show. I was also thinking, I like your redemption theme. I was thinking of that as well, and I was kind of comparing it to Loki, the TV show.
Yeah.
I don't want to say too much about that if people haven't seen Loki and they want to go see it. But there's certainly that element of it in there as well. It's a little bit different, but it kind of made me think of a similar thing of where Cassian starts and where he ends up going. What we see him, in Rogue One, the movie, because we know where this is going. So it just kind of reminded me of that thread a little bit too.
Yeah. So as a writer, what do you take away from Andor?
There's a couple of things. One, I'm going to steal the thing that you suggested, where you have multiple threads going and sort of the themes of those threads are feeding into each other. They're kind of parallel. I really like that. I think TV shows tend to do that really well, where you have an A story, a B story, a C story going on, or in this case, just multiple thread lines or multiple threads happening. And the things that the characters are going through are very different, but the message in each of those is very similar. I really like that style of writing. So that's one. And the other thing is mixing story segments, story elements. I'm not sure what the right word is, into one story. So in this case, we have, for example, there's a heist story and there's a prison break story, right? But the whole series isn't about a heist. The whole series isn't about a prison break. It's two different things in two different locations that happen in the same story. I really liked that. Again, it it gives some variety to the story, so you don't feel like, okay, we're just doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
So that's another one of my takeaways. What are your takeaways or takeaway?
One of my takeaways is, like we talked about, sort of like the dominoes falling, the links in the chain of events, just how tight each one of those, the causation is.
Yeah.
Because of this, then that. Because of this, then that. I really like that as a writer. I think that makes for a compelling story. The other thing of it is, and this is something that I kind of alluded to at the very beginning of the podcast, talking about how some people are not crazy about this because this isn't, your good versus evil hero's journey story. And this is more of the sort of the messy shades of gray story of how the rebellion got started. But I think there's something that's really interesting in sort of grounding a story in the everyday people. And in a lot of ways, it actually reminds me a little bit of Shakespeare, where if you read some of the Shakespeare's plays, you have, like, for example, let's take Henry V, right? Henry V is a king, and this king is surrounded by his nobles and his knights as he's fighting the noble fight against the French. But Shakespeare always had another layer of characters which would be appealing to his non-noble audience, there in the theater, of the sort of everyday characters who were usually comedic and sort of just showing what the grunts went through as the king is fighting his noble battle in Agincourt, right? And I think that having a story with sort of your noble characters who are striving to bring good triumph over evil, balanced with your everyday characters of the everyday people who are just going about their business, doing what they have to do, and showing how they suffer or succeed as the good is being conquered, or evil is being conquered by good. I think that has real value and really helps ground a story.
I agree. That's great.
Thank you.
It was interesting when I watched Rogue One, I wasn't necessarily thinking, oh, I want to see a backstory of Cassian Andor. But I think they did a great job with it. And there's a lot of depth and complexity to the story. And it's not just about him. It's about what else is going on in the Empire, what else is going on in the Rebellion. And I think that was really smart.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in the television series Andor. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as we discuss the story told in the novel Red Rising by Pierce Brown. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, always great to visit the Star Wars universe. Thanks.
Indeed. And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.